Discussions in Depth Psychology is powered by Pacifica Graduate Institute. Your host is Bonnie Bright. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discussions in Depth Psychology, which is powered by Pacifica Graduate Institute. My name is Bonnie Bright, and I'm your host, and I finished my own PhD at Pacifica in the Depth Psychology program there. And this series is meant to bring more information about depth psychology into the world and help us to extend it to everyone so that we can really help grow it and share it in the world. And I'm here today with my guest, Thomas Moore, who's a psychotherapist and author who, of course, is widely known for his book, Care of the Soul. And Thomas, thank you so much for being with me. I know it's been a big week for you and you have a lot of writing deadlines and different things, but I'm grateful to have you here.
It's nice to be with you, Bonnie.
Well, thanks. So let's go ahead and just share a little bit more about Thomas. I'm pretty sure that most people who are listening to this will know who you are, Thomas, but I'm going to go ahead and read your bio, and then we'll just jump into a series of questions. One thing that's important to let everybody know is that Thomas is going to be speaking at the upcoming Climate of Change conference in April of 2016 in honor of Pacifica Graduate Institute's 40th anniversary. So if people want to know more about that, you can find out more at pacifica.edu, and you'll see the Climate of Change information there on the homepage currently. So meanwhile, Thomas Moore Ph.D. received his degree in religion from Syracuse University. Before that, he was a monk for 13 years. He is the author of Care of the Soul and 19 other books, including the newest one, A Religion of One's Own, a guide to creating a personal spirituality in a secular world, with 4 new publications coming out in 2016. That's a big undertaking. He's been a psychotherapist for 40 years and lectures widely on depth psychology, religion, spirituality, and the arts. He was a close friend of James Hillman for 38 years. He's also a musician, translator, and writer of fiction. You can find out more about Thomas at www.careofthesoul.net. So Thomas, as I mentioned, you've been busy. You've done a lot of writing. I have a number of your books on my own shelf, and it's always a wonderful opportunity to be able to sort of get to the mind, I guess, or I should say maybe the soul that's behind some of that writing that has been so inspirational to so many people for a long, long time. When your bio mentioned that you had been a psychotherapist for 40 years, I almost couldn't believe it. And yet you must look back on that and really have some appreciation for how time has passed a day at a time, and the years just kind of go by. And yet here you are now at this point in time and able to really be someone who a lot of people will look up to and have taken, again, great inspiration from your works. So grateful for your contributions to the field. Why don't we start by talking a little bit about spirit and soul? Because this is a topic that you have contemplated long, I'm sure. And I think that a lot of people who have a background in depth psychology have probably had some discussion around that, some understanding of it. But I wonder how you would define it to us.
It's a little tricky. Because spirit and soul are very close to each other, and yet they're distinct. So as I see it, the spirit is that part of us or anything we do or part of our culture that has certain qualities. For example, moving into the future is a rather spirited thing to do. We imagine a better future, and all of that idealism and some science fiction and hope, all of that is an aspect of spirit. Spirit takes us up and out of ourselves, and the positive side of it is that we're able to reach into a bigger world and have a sense of the cosmos. So that's all important, and it's very, very good, very valuable. On the other side, the soul is much more intimate and part of our daily life, and very much embodied in our physical world, in our physical bodies. So when you get sick, you really feel your soul. And when you lose something in life, you feel your soul because the emotions are very poignant. And you get in touch with that deeper part of yourself, which is the soul. So there are these two directions, both of them equally valuable, both of them quite beautiful. Both of them have their shadow elements, things that are difficult to deal with, and they often get into forms that are very problematical. So we have a complicated situation, and to make it even worse is that people use these terms in such different ways. I'm basing what I just said on a very long tradition that's at least 2,000 years old, going back to some of the earliest teachers of soul. So that's who I am. I like to keep my ideas rooted in the past. And the past teaches us that there's a difference between spirit and soul.
And I think also that there is an importance in making that distinction between the two of them.
It's very, very helpful. I find as I travel and talk to people this is probably the most common question I get these days is what's the difference between spirit and soul? And when people talk about it, when we have discussions about it, they come away and then they tell me that this has been one of the most useful ideas that they've ever had.
Well, I have to agree, and particularly among those of us who are really paying attention to some of the, I guess, the movements that occur in our daily lives and also in the culture, because of course, nothing happens in a vacuum. And so as we begin to really experience what that movement or that thread is, that really, I guess there's, as you said, there's so many different definitions of it, but for me, I often experience soul as a kind of vitality, maybe like a deep current that's kind of running through things. And I know that in some of your writing, you mentioned that the soul thrives on the holy, which is obviously a term that is not commonly used in our daily life, our culture. We're in an election season. We have so much media kind of bombarding us all the time. You had mentioned that there's a recognition of this non-human dimension. So can you just say a little bit more about how that comes into play?
Most of the work I do is rooted either in the religious and spiritual traditions or in the depth psychology of Jung, and I'm very indebted to James Hillman. And all of these things, all of these resources for me, accept the idea that there's more going on within us and in the world around us than we can control or understand or know anything about. And we don't want to, I think none of us, the people I mentioned, none of us want to say what that is. We're not talking about what is out there as though this were a physical conversation. It's not about what's physical. It's about what we experience. So my experience is that, for example, in my life, you read my biography, I certainly did not design that life at all. I discovered it as I went along, step by step. And from one phase to the other, I had no idea what was going to happen next. That required a great deal of trust and faith in life itself to keep going. Now, to me, that is an acknowledgement of something that is not human. It's more than what any human being could accomplish or even understand, comprehend. I don't understand it myself, how I happen to be where I am in my life. It doesn't make any real sense to me. It's not what I intended to be. So what is beyond ourselves, you may call that destiny or fate or the guidance of an angel. You can use all kinds of language and metaphor for it. We don't know, I don't think we know what that is. So we use poetic language to describe and express the mysterious. But the mysterious, from the point of view of great value and your feeling of reverence toward it, is what I would call the holy. So when I experience this mysterious thing that has shaped my life, and I feel a certain reverence for it because it has really done so much for me, I would then call it the holy, because that's how I experience it. It's something to be revered.
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned your recent book, which is A Religion of One's Own. And it's really about how people can tap into that sense of spirituality, because we have moved away from more of a formal kind of religious practice, I guess, in our planet. And so obviously some places in the world have more organized religion, maybe some have less, but it seems like there's a general trend in the United States in particular, at least, that people are kind of moving away from that religion. The new generations are looking for something different. So do you think that religion can come back, or how do you define religion, or do we actually need it in our culture today, or can we fall back on what you were just talking about the sense of the holy?
Well, it depends how you use the word religion. Most people probably hear the word religion and they think of a body of beliefs or an institution, things that you have to do and not do, kind of a list of moral behavior, that kind of thing. That kind of religion, I don't think we really need it anymore. I do think that the institutions can be useful, but they would have to be, in my view, they would have to be reimagined to suit our times. On the other hand, I use the word religion differently. I've studied religion almost all my life, and so I've thought about it a great deal. And I come down to a simple definition. I give you a definition. I define religion as a creative and concrete response to the mysteries that we experience in ourselves and around us. A concrete and creative response. So it's not just about belief, and it's not an idea, and it's not about perfecting myself. It's my relationship to that mysterious other that is part of our experience, our world. And a lot of people say, well, there is no other because that's just an illusion. Well, if that's what you want to think, that's fine. But I'd rather be positive about this experience we have of being in a world that has a lot of mysteriousness about it. And we can relate to that individually. Now, one of the models I use very much in A Religion of One's Own is Henry David Thoreau, one of my New England compatriots. And he, like Emerson and other transcendentalists, thought that the institutional religions were no longer relevant. And yet, they were very spiritual people. In fact, in my definition, they were very religious people, in my definition of this personal experience of the holy. Now, what they did was show that you can have a very rich religious life by designing your life to be more contemplative, to allow yourself to be in touch with the mysterious things of life, to be in relationship to nature, as Thoreau certainly was, to see, as I do anyway, that even secular literature is holy. I get religious ideas and spiritual guidance from the secular poets. So I don't make any distinction between the secular and the sacred in that regard. But that's because of the nature of my way of understanding religion, which I think is one that maybe should now be considered, because we've gone through a major change in culture, and nobody decided it, but the religions simply have changed and they're losing favor. And I think they should be losing favor generally because we're moving into a new world.
Yes, that's true. And as many of us are paying attention to, this is often an archetypal kind of cycle where things cannot stay fixed for very long. They always are in some kind of constant motion. So if they're not on the rise, then of course they're in decline. And this is one thing that I think we are definitely experiencing, both in the form of religion as well as in the natural world, as we begin to watch the ecological destruction and even the social destruction that's beginning to take root in so many places that we're looking at. And you mentioned something that I think is really important, and that is the capacity to touch into these feelings of wonder and awe and things that are other. You know, I mean, we have to be observing in some level to be able to observe what's other, I guess, even if it is part of ourselves. But I think it's also important that we allow ourselves to be touched by these things. If we're not open or not making that space in our lives through literature or through art or through some kind of a daily practice where we actually open ourselves to that, then we don't have the same capacity to be touched by, and therefore the transformation on some level probably is going to be forced on us at some point, because if we don't engage with it, then that change is going to happen, right? Whether we like it or not.
Yes, well, what you just said is extremely important, and I agree completely. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to be in a position where we can perceive that which is mysterious and not within our control. By the way, I want to keep saying I'm not talking about anything out there. I'm just talking about leaving that wide open. I don't know how to describe it. There are certain experiences we have subjectively that we are ignorant of and that we can't control. And we can't prepare for those things, but I think one thing we can do, and this is something I learned as a monk many, many years ago, we talked about what we called in Latin contemptus mundi, which doesn't mean contempt of the world, it means resistance to the world. So in order for us to develop this sense of the holy, we have to resist the secular culture and the science-based culture that's around us. I'm not saying there's any problem with science in itself. It's just that the philosophy that's associated with science today doesn't have any room for the holy and for the other. And so, I would love to debate those people who want to say that the secular world is enough for us. It isn't. And that's why I said in your quote that in order to have a soulful life, you need a sense of the holy, because somehow, in a rather paradoxical way, the more we can be in touch with the transcendent and the mysterious, the more human we are. Like it touches and opens and feeds our souls, that thing very deep inside us that is only fulfilled when we have some connection to a bigger reality. And so I put soulful life right next to the life of the holy.
Yes, and I think the way that you were describing what it is to be human had a real impact on me just now. And I realized, all those conversations that I've been lucky enough to be privy to about the root of human being humus and being related to the earth and how we're interconnected completely. And it's that whole conversation about in and out, right? You keep saying, well, I'm not talking about something out there. It's just something, James Hillman believed that the unconscious ran through everything, right? He didn't often talk about it. And I think you had mentioned that in one of your books somewhere, that he didn't often talk about or write about the unconscious as something separate, but understood that it was something underlying everything that it is that we do.
Yes, I think he would say that everything has its unconsciousness. Or he didn't use that word unconscious a whole lot either. He would say that everything has a soul, and that we make a mistake sometimes of thinking as a soul as some little fairy inside of us, some little twinkle toes that flies around inside of us. He rather said that the soul is in everything. He was very interested in this very ancient teaching of the anima mundi, or the soul of the world. And so he was so dedicated to that I remember when he and I were having discussions, I guess it was about the 1980s sometime, and he decided to stop practicing individual therapy because he was so committed to this idea of the soul of the world. He wanted to turn his therapeutic attention to the world. And that was a challenge for me because I didn't want to do that, and I didn't understand it. I couldn't articulate it. And I still do individual therapy. I did not make that move that he made, but I'd rather do both end. I'd rather continue work with the individual and then do what I can. And this is the purpose of my books, to write the books. It's to try to bring an awareness of soul in the world outside of us.
Yes, I understand that. And I think that it's really valuable that some of us have the capacity to do both kinds of work, both the individual and more of the collective kinds of work, because we have to start somewhere, right? But I think that Jung often agreed also that we have to start with ourselves. The work really begins at home. And once we can begin to make some of those changes, much needed changes that we each need individually, then that can ripple out into the world. But there's a way to start looking at it from the outside in as well. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, and that is this idea of the resistance to the world or against the world. And what I was thinking about when you mentioned that is the whole idea that we really need to, at times, just completely surrender to what's about us at that time. And of course, one of the books that I have on my shelf from you is Dark Nights of the Soul, which has been a really profound book, and I think is an exploration of a topic that is not easy to be talked about in our culture, and yet it's something that everybody goes through at some point or another, these kind of valleys in life. Can you just say a little bit more about how you perceive that we can best deal with those valleys?
Well, the best way, I think, to deal with these dark nights, valleys, disappointments and losses, all those things that happen to us all the time. They're always, there's big or small things that are happening that put a little shade over life, takes the sunshine away. And I think that there are a number of things we can do. One is to recognize that they are part of life. That seems so simple, but it's an important basis. Instead of thinking that these dark moments are an aberration or a sickness or a bacteria or something like that have to be gotten rid of, if instead we could see that they are like the seasons, like winter and like night, they are part of a seasonal way of being. That's what we are. As a matter of fact, I strongly recommend when you're going through a dark night to really spend time out in the natural world to get that sense of the seasonal deep inside you, not just in your head, but actually feel it in your body that the seasons are changing, and that might help you deal with it. That's a first step. Another thing that I recommend in that book, there's many, many things that I've recommended there. One is that we find ways of expressing our experience, our dark night, in language that really depicts what we're going through. Today, so many people automatically say, I'm depressed. And that really doesn't say anything. It's a very abstract word. It might be better to say very specifically, I'm sad, I'm lonely, I'm hopeless, I don't have a purpose anymore, however you can express that. Now, I also suggest in dark nights that we go further and find some more artistic way of expressing what that is, to even, in fact, to find some beautiful way to express that dark night. Because once you can find the beautiful, like let's say a really good poem about how bad you're feeling, that would really be something, because it's the beauty that brings soul forward. It's the beautiful. So if we can find either visual art or words or something that will show us the beauty of what we're going through, we are making some progress.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I've heard you talk a bit about the Japanese art form where pottery is broken and
Yes.
shattered, that it's repaired with gold. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because that's such a compelling story.
Well, you may be referring to wabi-sabi. I don't know, the Japanese aesthetic where the beautiful is seen in particular in something where the age shows, or where it's falling apart, or if there's a crack in the pottery, or if there's a forgotten line somewhere, or you're reading a poem and the paper's ripped and you can't get to the one line you'd like. All of these imperfections, that wabi-sabi aesthetic, it's obvious, isn't it? That could help us deal with these valleys, because that's who we are. We are wabi-sabi at that moment. There's something about us that doesn't fit the ideal we would have, or the sense of health and perfection that we carry with us a great deal. Now, what if we had an image of ourselves as essentially and beautifully imperfect? That would help us get through those moments, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what we are talking about here is each of us is going to have a different way, probably, of engaging with whatever it is that's coming to us, and of tapping into that sense of soul, or the sense of holy, or the sacred. But it just seems like it's so critical for us to be able to move forward. Do you have ideas about how we might look at our culture collectively and find ways to introduce the holy or the sacred into the culture more collectively?
Yeah, it's really a good question, because we are suffering from our secularism. We believe in it. I don't think people are aware of how secular their world is. You can have people going to church once a week and still living in a completely secular world. And so the church and the secular world then are split. It's like they're opposites. And that kind of a split is an indication of neurosis. Something is wrong. There's something that is not working when you have a split of that kind. So I would suggest, if we can find ways to bring that together, where we don't separate what we do on one day of the week from the rest of the world, that would really help. So, for example, you could think carefully about the job you're doing and the work you're doing as an individual. Every job, I would say, every job ought to have some sense of contributing to humanity in it, some deep ethics at the very root of it. And if your job is unethical at some level, that's significant. It's worth considering whether you should stay with it. That's a tough choice. That's a tough way. It's not a sweet way of doing it, but it's a very tough way of trying to make your world more holy. You make it holy by living more ethically. Ethics, morality have always been connected to the spiritual life or to religion. So that's, I think, a very good way to do it. Another way would be to find that the holy is manifested in the natural world. So we could certainly make every effort to move against this degradation of the natural world that we're experiencing. We're letting so much go by. We're just letting the planet be destroyed. And it's we who are doing it because we are not concerned enough about it or don't have the vision for it. So that would be certainly another way to bring religion into the culture. It's an ethical way, and it's based on our love of the natural world and our awareness that our spiritual life requires nature. So it's not just that when we hurt the natural world, we no longer have the physical material we need to make our homes and our businesses and everything. It's that we don't have the material we need for our spirituality and for our souls. And those are just, there's so many things we could do, but those are two big ones.
Yes, they are two big ones. And they're two things that are up in our culture, I think, right now that
Yes.
can do something about. And of course, there has to be a certain amount of consciousness in the individual to want to try to make those changes or to want to become more whole in that way. There's a lot of unconsciousness going around too, and I'm sure that all of us have it in places that we don't even begin to, that's the whole nature of it, right? But I think the value in what you just said is being able to make the decision that we want to have the intention, and then to begin to align ourselves to something that is larger that can actually guide us in a way that our lives can then unfold from there.
Another thing, if I can bring it up, this will be kind of whining, but it's all right. One of the things that bothers me is that our psychological thinking is so superficial. I don't think we are at all psychologically mature, generally speaking. You have to learn psychology. Someone has to teach you, and you have to grow up learning through experience. You have to go through passages and initiations in order to become a mature person. That takes a lot of work and takes a long time. It's a lifelong kind of thing. But in order to do that and go through these things and see them as valuable, we need a psychology that is deeper. This is why, like for me, to connect religions with psychology is very valuable, because the religions also teach a lot about initiation and about values and about seeing the world, the vision of the world. But if we have a secular psychology and a personalistic psychology, which, by the way, is something Hillman often criticized, personalism in psychology, we have that, then we don't have the kind of thinking we need in order to deal with these issues. And as you were saying, we need an awareness, a certain kind of awareness. And I think that one of the problems is that our psychology, like the psychology taught in our schools, is it's all based, so much based on statistics and research studies and all that kind of thing. Those things have a place, but they are instruments and they're tools. And if you don't have depth of thought, and if you don't have a deep culture, and if you aren't connected to the wisdom of the past, then all of those bits of information really don't help because they have no home. They don't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, you're certainly tapping into something that I hold very deeply myself, and that is the value of depth psychology. There's a reason that we call it that, right? And there's been a lot of conversations around that term. In fact, even at least in some of the circles that I've been in, about whether or not that is the right term. But I still like it because it says what it is, right? It talks about the fact that we're looking under the surface of things.
Yes, I've been criticized for it too, but so what? I mean,
So what?
probably an indication that we're on the right track. So maybe there are better words. I haven't heard a really good word yet to describe the psychology that we're working in. But I think depth is the best because it is an image. It's a movement downward, inward, and that's pretty good. I understand that there's more to psychology than what is down and in. I understand that. There's a kind of upward psychology too, and that's important. But nevertheless, I will stick with it.
Well, I agree with you. So I guess in our party of two here, we can go for that.
Yes.
Well, Thomas, the time has gone really fast. I'm really grateful for the time that you've spent with me today. I just wanted to close by asking you had, I know, spent, as we said before, nearly 40 years with James Hillman. And I wondered if you would just close us out with a few words about your work with him, maybe something, a story or something about what drew you two together in the first place and why you had such a great relationship for all those years.
Well, it's really strange that we had this relationship, this friendship, because we were so different from each other. In fact, we worked together quite often. We would teach together. And I'm this type, I have a very strong mother complex. And I have to take care of everybody. That's my problem. And so when I teach, I'm very aware of people, what they're going through. I can just have such empathy for any kind of anxiety they have when they're talking. And Hillman was just the opposite. He was very strong, and he always said that he did everything that he did, accomplished everything he did because of his anger. And so he trusted his anger. I trusted my empathy. And so we were very different. And I think there's some way we got along well because we acknowledged those differences, and they didn't bother us at all, really. And I think in a way, we shared each other's worlds that way and enjoyed those differences. It was not a friendship of sames in that respect. On the other hand, he and I were both educated in the classics and in philosophy, and we had wonderful conversations. We never stopped talking. We just meet up and start talking and never stop. And that went right on to the very end when I sat next to him when he was dying in his hospital bed. We continued to have long conversations. And those were the most precious moments of my life, I think. He lost some of the edginess of his anger, I think, at the very end. And those will be the moments that I remember most, I think.
That's beautiful. It's really lovely to see how you were archetypally related, because you could both relate through the archetypes that were at play at a given moment, maybe in your lives, and to carry that friendship through to the long term. So, well, Thomas, thank you so much for all the wonderful work that you're doing in the world. I mean, your writings are just really profound and amazing, and it's wonderful that you are contributing those. And just a reminder to everybody, you can learn more about Thomas's writing or find his books at careofthesoul.net. And also, Thomas will be speaking at Pacifica Graduate Institute's 40th Anniversary Celebration Conference, which is in April of 2016. So hope to see everybody there. Thank you again, Tom.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and good luck with your really terrific work. And I hope that you're tremendously successful.
Thank you. You've been listening to Discussions in Depth Psychology, powered by Pacifica Graduate Institute with host Bonnie Bright.